You're probably wondering why I'm standing all the way out in front of the high school from Haruhi Suzumiya. And that's because, in order to solve the longest standing mystery in all of anime, that of the true nature of its once most popular waifu, I'd come here, back to where it all started. But now that I am here, I realized that the true answer isn't out in the middle of nowhere, Japan, but it was in here, all along, in this book, and also in here, because boy, let me tell you, did I have to cook for this one in order to solve the mystery of who and what Haruhi Suzumiya really is, where she came from, and most importantly, answer the question of, is she actually God? Spoiler, yes, but also no. So while the anime introduces us to 3 theories about the true nature of the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya, one from each faction in the SOS Brigade, a data explosion, a distortion in space-time, and a sleeping god, there are 4 more, 3 corresponding theories, and we'll avoid any major spoilers, but in the books from what we'll call for now the anti-SOS Brigade. But what I'd also like to propose is a 7th, ultimate theory of Haruhi Suzumiya that, while never explicitly stated by anyone, I believe is implied once you fully understand every theory and each major character in the story. First, if you've never watched, or if it's been 20 years since you've seen The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, in brief, it's a coming-of-age story about this quirky girl, Haruhi, who, disillusioned with everyday life, forms a club to seek out the supernatural, ironically populated almost entirely by supernatural people sent here to secretly observe her, a mysterious godlike entity with the power to bend reality to her will. And so the story is about the shenanigans of this magical Scooby Gang as they try to solve the mystery of where she came from, keeping not only their identity but also her own true nature a secret from Haruhi herself. Okay, so now before we try to understand exactly what Haruhi is, I think we need to establish who Haruhi is, as a person, as a character, and for that we need to start 3 years before the events of the story, when her parents took her to a baseball game as a little girl. Because it's there where Haruhi, gazing upon the outline of thousands and thousands of people, realizes just how tiny and insignificant she is and wakes up to the cold and utter meaninglessness of her own existence in the world.
あれだけたくさんに思えた球場の人たちも実は一つかみでしかないんだってね。それまで私は自分がどこか特別な人間のように思ってた。そう気づいた時、私は急に私の周りの世界が
And so it's this sudden sense of isolation, of discovering the reality of being but an individual in a big scary world that drives her anger and intense sense of dissatisfaction with the world around her. From that moment, she decides that the world is a boring place and starts spending her life looking for the extraordinary, eventually founding the SOS Brigade to draw out any possible trace of the supernatural in the world around her. And that's how most people see Haruhi. But when you look at what she actually does with her life, what the SOS Brigade actually gets up to, you don't see a girl seeking out the weird and the strange. Instead, we find them writing wishes for Tanabata, entering a baseball tournament, making a website, and playing video games, going swimming at the beach, making a shitty movie with a cheap camcorder, throwing a silly little Christmas party. Sure, because of the nature of the SOS Brigade, these things all do have an underpinning of the supernatural, but Haruhi doesn't know that. To her, she's simply living the life of an ordinary Japanese high schooler. If you take even a small step back from her life, all you'll find is the ordinary.
あんたも日本人ならちゃんと覚えてないとダメじゃないの。ああ、そう。私こういうイベントごとはしっかりやることにしてんの。
And that brings us to the cultural festival midway through her first year of high school, when she accidentally discovers the meaning of life after finding herself on stage holding a guitar and dressed in her bunny girl outfit.
初めて楽譜見てから本番まで1時間しかなかったからぶつけなの。時間がなくて2曲しか用意できなかったの。だからこれがラスト。物足りないかもしれないけど、みんな思いっきり演奏するから聴いてね。じゃあ行きます。ラストマイミュージック。
And what she suddenly finds up on that stage is the exact opposite of the feeling she experienced all those years ago. Standing there in front of that crowd of students, singing and playing music to a gymnasium filled with people all cheering and shouting her name, being not just one silhouette among thousands in an incalculable crowd of people, but the person the crowd is gathered there for, to not stand among, but to be surrounded by, to be validated by all of those people. That is what she wanted. Simply to be noticed, for people to look upon her life and tell her that it's worth something. And so we see that despite what she says, what she really wanted never was the extraordinary. She just wanted to feel special. Seeking out the supernatural was just her own way of dealing with this thought.
考えてたら思いついたわ。面白いことは待っててもやってこないんだってね。
So on some level, Haruhi's powers aren't actually important because really they're a metaphor for this feeling of waking up to the insignificance of your own existence, for the feeling of being truly and utterly ordinary. We're all the same, but that doesn't mean our lives aren't or can't be extraordinary. It's only a matter of perspective. Nothing that she really does is extraordinary, but it's she herself that makes it so.
あんなのでよかったのかなって少しは思うけど。なんていうの？今自分は何かをやってるっていう感じがした。
And that brings us to Kyon, because really, he's the key to understanding both Haruhi and this metaphor. Well, Haruhi is a normal girl wishing for the extraordinary but really desiring the everyday. Kyon is someone who spends every day wishing for peace and quiet, but what he really wants is the unusual.
はっきり答えろ。俺はハルヒとハルヒの起こす出来事を楽しいと思っていたんじゃないのか。言えよ。
And the question every character asks is why him? Why was he, a completely ordinary human, chosen by Haruhi to be the first member in her club? And I mean, we'll get to the literal answer in a bit, but also because he's exactly her opposite, and in doing so enables Haruhi while bringing stability and normalcy to her life. What Kyon shows Haruhi is the beauty of the everyday. She spends so much time trying to escape the cold and boring tedium of the ordinary, and here he's showing her that the most extraordinary thing about them is how normal it all is.
こんな状態に置かれて派遣したよ。俺はなんだかんだ言って今までの暮らしが結構好きだったんだな。
What Kyon is able to give her is perspective. Sure, there's trivial, boring things about everyday life, but there's not just fun, but meaning to be had too, and that's what she really wants.
会えるわよきっと。この世界だっていつまでも闇に包まれてるわけじゃない。明日になったら太陽だって昇ってくるわよ。私にはわかるの。
Okay, so that's all fun and cool and media literacy and all, but the question we're here to answer is what is Haruhi Suzumiya? And while we're going to introduce each of the factions and anti-factions in the story and each of their beliefs, in order to determine what is true and what is speculation, we need to start by establishing what we can more or less describe as fact. And the first thing that we know is that all of this began 3 years before the beginning of the story, when each of the factions became aware of the existence of the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya. And you'll notice that aligns with Haruhi's awakening at that baseball game, which we can establish as the catalyst for her gaining powers in all events in the story. And so each faction agrees that Haruhi, while not conscious of this herself, has the power to shape reality according to her will, the power to will anything in or out of existence, the power to create and destroy the world. And well, see, that's the issue here. That's kind of it. That doesn't say we can't say anything else about her, see the remaining runtime of this video, but this is what we can set as a baseline of established fact about her. But while we're on the subject, there is one more related theory we need to discuss to understand the story. Just trust me, we're going somewhere with all of this. And that is that the universe itself only began 3 years ago with the awakening of Haruhi Suzumiya.
3年前にハルヒが世界を作り変えたっていうのか。
作り変えたというよりも3年前に世界は始まったとでも言うべきでしょうか。
Now, of course, as Kyon points out, this inherently feels crazy because, I mean, just look at, I don't know, everything. But what if all of that is an illusion? What if the world was born 3 years ago, only it was made to appear as if it was billions of years old? What if you carbon dated the oldest objects on Earth and they were merely created with the inherent properties of being millions of years old 3 years ago? How would you know? How would you tell the difference if everything you see and smell and touch and measure is indistinguishable from a world that is actually billions of years old? Now, by the same logic, it's of course entirely possible that the universe came into question yesterday, or last week, or at any other random arbitrary point in time, but the thing is, whether or not it is actually 3 years old is, for all intents and purposes, completely irrelevant. The important part is simply the fact that everything began in that stadium 3 years ago, and we need to establish that as the beginning of our story. So, again, None of this really answers the question of what Haruhi is or why she has this power in the first place, so to answer that, we need to examine every single theory of Haruhi Suzumiya and try to determine what among them, if anything, we can establish as the truth.
私の仕事は鈴宮春日を観察して入手した情報を統合思念体に報告すること。
Our first theory is from Nagato, a small, expressionless and emotionless girl who Haruhi finds when she appropriates somehow both the literature club room and Nagato, its sole member, into her own club to meet the 5-member requirement, even though she never manages to officially register it with the student council. Nagato mostly sits there and reads, seemingly all but indifferent to the SOS Brigade and all of Haruhi's bullshit, until one day, she calls Kyon over to the park and brings him up to her apartment, where he finds that the only object in her spacious 3-bedroom flat she lives alone in is a single Japanese-style table in the center of the room. She then serves him a socially inappropriate amount of tea before telling him that she is not, in fact, human, but instead a humanoid interface of the Data Overmind sent here to communicate with organic life and watch over the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya. The Data Overmind is a non-corporeal entity born not from organic life, but from the sea of data covering the universe, a being that slowly grew in intelligence and size as it gathered more and more data, eventually becoming sentient and integrating into a giant hive mind stretching across the galaxy. Existing beyond time and space, it knows and sees almost everything in the universe at all points in time, or at least it did until the appearance of Haruhi Suzumiya 3 years ago. While it was observing Earth, having previously believed that organic life forms with limited data accumulation and transmission abilities could never develop intelligence, Earth somehow produced humanity and eventually really caught its attention with a massive explosion of data coming from a small island nation in the northern hemisphere. While the cause of the explosion is currently unknown, the source is unmistakable, the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya, who intermittently emits gigantic torrents of data. So Nagato's faction, the Data Overmind, believes that Haruhi Suzumiya is an explosion of raw data and the key to the evolution of all life in the universe, both organic and data, and possesses the ability to control the data around her, and has thus sent Nagato and other humanoid interfaces to observe the source of this data and serve as intermediaries between itself and humanity. And since the Data Overmind does not experience time linearly and exists across all of space-time, it has necessarily come to a mutual understanding with the 2 other primary factions of the story.
信じてもらえないかもしれないけど、私はこの時代の人間ではありません。もっと未来から来ました。
The first represented by Mikuru, a shy and klutzy babe who Haruhi ropes in to serve as the club's moe mascot. While to Haruhi, she's simply her personal dress-up doll. On the first SOS Brigade outing to seek out the supernatural, Mikuru pulls Kyon aside and sits him down by the river, all embarrassed to be alone with a cute boy like Kyon, wink, and tells him that she comes from the far future. Sadly, she cannot, however, tell him specifically when and where she comes from, as that's all classified information, and even if it wasn't, she herself is a puppet, a blissful, ignorant tool of none other than her own future self, sent here to observe the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya. She then briefly explains to Kyon the reality of space-time, that it's like a flipbook animation, a collection of an almost infinite series of connected but ultimately independent events. So time is one of the more confusing and abstract elements of the story, but I think this quote by evil time traveler Fujiwara, who we'll get to in a bit, is pretty enlightening. There's a bit of a problem with the way Asahina and I travel through time. Because of the method we use, it's impossible to avoid penetrating the time plane. In other words, we travel by poking holes in time. Don't worry, a single one is too small to cause any real changes. It's easy to fix. Of course, the lengthier the time leap becomes, the more numerous the damages to the time plane are. Also, the more particular a point in time is used as a destination, the more holes there are. Do you understand so far? Essentially what he's saying is that excessive travel to the same point in time will destabilize space-time, and so time travel agents have to travel through time to repair time caused by damage they created, which sounds circular until you realize that it's also generally impossible to change the order of established events, meaning that it's actually impossible for any of them to avoid time travel because the fact that they are changing the timeline and dealing with the consequences of their own time travel is already baked into the concept of time itself. Confused? Yeah, me too. To the point where I'm not even sure what I just said is accurate, but the only thing you really need to know is that people from the future exist and follow rules regarding time travel, but also all rules go out the window when it comes to Haruhi Suzumiya because reality is what she says it is. So anyway, Mikuru came here 3 years ago when a huge timequake, a disruption in space-time, was detected, and she was sent here to observe it, only to discover that it is impossible to travel further back than those 3 years ago. And here, at the center of that time distortion, she found the entity known as Haruhi Suzumiya. What exactly she is and exactly why further time travel is impossible is still a mystery, but it's Mikuru's job to remain in this time and observe her.
僕たちが何とかしなければ確実に世界は崩壊するのです。
So now that brings us to the final person to approach Kyon about Haruhi, Koizumi Itsuki, an esper belonging to an organization only known as the Agency, which was created 3 years ago after they all woke up to discover that they each had special powers related to Haruhi. So what he possesses aren't everyday psychic powers like telekinesis, but rather powers designed for a single specific purpose. See, whenever Haruhi's frustration with the world takes hold in her psyche, it manifests in the physical world through these hidden areas called closed spaces, where towering giants called celestials run amok, rampaging and destroying the world around them. If left unchecked, they will grow and grow, altering the real world until they eventually become reality themselves. And it's the Agency's job to enter and restore these spaces by destroying the celestials. So, more than the other two, the existence of Koizumi brings up an important question of the nature of Haruhi's powers. See, the reason he exists is to prevent the destruction of the world from her own subconscious. But it's exactly her subconscious itself that generated the rampaging celestials, so it's inherently working against itself by creating its own disease and cure. But then you realize that the mission of the Agency and every other faction is to observe Haruhi Suzumiya, which is also an inherent contradiction, as they were specifically created because Haruhi wished it. She wanted to find aliens and time travelers and espers, and so she surrounded herself with each of them, but she couldn't just pull them out of nowhere, and so the world itself either had to be rearranged or already exists in a way that would logically permit each of them to be gathered by Haruhi herself. Essentially, everything that happens around Haruhi is a self-fulfilling prophecy, seemingly only existing to make the world more mysterious and fun. This will be relevant later. So the Agency believes that specifically because Haruhi is unaware of her powers, of her as of yet unconscious ability to manifest her desires into reality, that she's not quite God, but a sleeping god, and that all of reality exists inside of a dream, in which her passing whimsy can alter the very fabric of the world. Consequently, they fear that falling out of favor with God could mean being destroyed and remade like a child building a castle in the sand, and live to appease her. And while for now I mostly want to lay out each of the theories of Haruhi Suzumiya, I want to talk for a sec about this idea of appeasing an angry and tumultuous god, because I think it's important to how we view Haruhi and the world overall. See, while Koizumi and the other espers were kept busy for the past 3 years before the event of the story as Haruhi's subconscious mind raged against the structure of the world, her tempestuous soul has been more or less stable ever since starting high school and joining the SOS Brigade. She spent her middle school years angry, always searching for something that she can never find, but finally finds happiness with the SOS Brigade, almost like she's finally found what she's been searching for. In other words, Kyon. See, one thing every member, but particularly Koizumi, asks of Kyon is to not let Haruhi lose hope for the world, to help them appease Haruhi. In other words, to keep her happy. While this generally involves helping her organize various games and activities for the SOS Brigade in order to stave off boredom, they also push Kyon to act on Haruhi's unrealized romantic affection for him several times across the books, but most notably at the end of Melancholy, after Haruhi accidentally walks in on what looks like Mikuru cozying up to Kyon, throwing her into a jealous rage that threatens to destroy the world. There, Kyon finds himself in a special closed space, the rest of the world fading away as Haruhi prepares to remake the world new, with the only thing important enough to be salvaged from the old world being Kyon himself. And what saves it, as Haruhi stands there beaming at him that it's all gonna be okay, is Kyon facing himself as he takes Haruhi in his arms and tells her that he likes the old world how it was, and kisses her, upon which they each find themselves in bed at home as if waking from a dream. And the world goes on. And so while Koizumi is supposed to be the only one that reveres her as a god and is the main one recruiting Kion's help, the rest of them all do work to appease Haruhi by ensuring she's never too bored or unsatisfied with the world. Which then begs the question, if Kion is the one with Haruhi's favor, the one with the power to appease her, the next thing we then need to ask is, wait, what the fuck is Kion? Is he special too? And the answer is yes, very much so, because while physically he is simply an ordinary human being, every faction of the SOS Brigade believes that he was chosen by Haruhi Suzumiya. And I believe there's a really interesting reason for that, which is the crux of this very video. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, to summarize the first three theories of Haruhi Suzumiya.
001
Nakato Yuki's faction, the Data Overmind, believes that Haruhi is an explosion of data and the key to the evolution of all life in the universe.
002
Asahina Mikuru's faction, the Time Travelers, believe that Haruhi is the source of a gigantic timequake and the key to all of space-time.
003
And Koizumi Itsuki's faction, the Agency, believes that Haruhi is a sleeping god and that all of reality exists inside of a dream. Before we move on, a few things. One, to clarify, when I say each member represents a different faction, particularly in regards to the SOS Brigade, that's not to say that the entire faction is in unity. Like midway through Melancholy, Asakura, representing a rebel offshoot of the Data Overmind, tries to assassinate Haruhi's chosen one, Kyon, in order to provoke a reaction from her when the general consensus of the Data Overmind is to patiently observe her. Similarly, a number of Koizumi's agency believe that deliberately testing Haruhi's abilities and limits would bring them a closer understanding of their god, but the primary block believes that passive observation is the most rational course of action, as anything rash could result in the destruction of the world. So while dissenting voices and movements do exist in each faction, we'd be here all day if we had to go over every individual's opinions, so we're gonna consider the beliefs held by each main character as representative of their respective factions. 2, basically all of each faction's beliefs are just speculation based on a very narrow established reality and their own limited knowledge. And so to understand what's really going on, we need to understand the perspective of every faction of the SOS Brigade, as well as every corresponding faction. Yes, I know, just give me a sec. And finally, 3, you'll notice that it's entirely possible that all of the beliefs of our 3 main factions are true at the same time, which probably means that they indeed are all at least somewhat true. Do I have evidence for this? No, but for now, let's focus on what I think is by far the biggest and most important one of these claims, which is that Haruhi is God. Because, for one, you literally can't go bigger than this. If she's God, then that's kind of the be-all and end-all of everything. But also, because this is in direct opposition to the beliefs held by the... Okay, so for everyone who's only seen the anime, well, I've kind of alluded to them before, and I'm gonna keep most specific events fairly vague in order to avoid spoilers. It's time to talk about the anti-SOS Brigade, which is kind of like the SOS Brigade, only evil, and also they're a bunch of dicks. この事件は君が解決することになる。現時点で僕の言える、これがささやかな予言だよ。We're first introduced to them in the first episode of Season 3, please, Snowy Mountain Syndrome, during the SOS Brigade's winter ski trip when they're suddenly caught in a snowstorm and take refuge inside a mysterious spooky mansion. Well, again, I'll keep this vague. This ends with Haruhi having a wet dream about Kyon, cough, and Nagato falling ill after being cut off from the Data Overmind. And eventually, we learn that the power that trapped them there came from Kuyo Suo, the first member of what I'm gonna call the anti-Haruhi faction, known as the Heavenly Canopy Dominion, which is an entity not unlike the Data Overmind, only somewhat more primitive. It's unclear exactly how powerful the Heavenly Canopy Dominion is, but given that Nagato succumbs to them more than once, it's safe to say they're pretty dangerous. The next is the Time Travelers, which, okay, so they're basically the same as Mikuru's people, with the biggest difference being, well, their guy Fujiwara is like the biggest dick of them all, and time travels here to kidnap Mikuru and try to change the future to suit his organization's goals. See, while the SOS Brigade believes that Kyon is Haruhi's chosen one, the evil SOS Brigade believes that Haruhi's powers are actually a mistake and that they should belong with someone else. And the evil agency, represented by Kyoko Tachibana, believes that Haruhi's actually a false deity and that Sasaki, Kyon's friend from middle school, is actually the true god of this world. So Sasaki is a, calm and studious, but weird in her own way, referring to herself as Boku, but only to boys, possibly to discourage romantic interest as she, like Haruhi, thinks of romance as a type of mental illness. Also like Haruhi, Sasaki is eminently intelligent, even managing to guess Kyon's real name by working backwards from the knowledge that it comes from how his name is written. Side note, Kyon's real name is never actually mentioned anywhere. The Japanese internet has come up with Takahiro, but I'm actually more inclined to believe the Chinese internet's theory that his name is Soichi, which is a whole rabbit hole we just do not have time to get into right now. Anyway, you can kind of think of Sasaki as sort of the opposite of Haruhi in everything that she isn't. She's outgoing like Haruhi, but polite and reserved with an easy smile that lets her get along with anyone. So when she randomly shows up to the SOS Brigade's outing one day and introduces herself as Kyon's good friend, Haruhi gets thrown into a jealous turmoil where even though she tries to deny her own feelings of romance and she logically knows that Kyon doesn't think that way about Sasaki and is overall just kind of clueless, she can't help but be plagued with doubt when a total baddie just kind of shows up. And for some reason, when Sasaki stood next to me and claimed to be my close friend, the strange expression on Haruhi's face made me feel like I'd gone outside without an umbrella despite an impending thunderstorm. Why was that? Yeah, why indeed. Needless to say, the sudden appearance of Sasaki brings a new wave of rampaging Celestials. Anyway, shortly after this, Tachibana and the anti-SOS Brigade, along with Sasaki, confront Kyon directly, bringing him to the cafe where the SOS Brigade normally sits, and reveals to him that, like how Nakato and Mikuru aren't the only aliens and time travelers, Koizumi's agency aren't the only ones with superpowers. And the cause of Tachibana's superpowers, much like Koizumi, was a single person 4 years ago. No, not Haruhi. Sasaki. Interestingly, Sasaki herself doesn't believe in this and has no interest in being God, but asks Kyon to hear them out anyway, at which point Tachibana takes Kyon's hands and brings him inside one of Sasaki's closed spaces. Once outside, the first thing I did was look up at the sky. The rain had stopped. No, there weren't any clouds. The sky was a sepia monotone. There did not seem to be a sun. The sky itself was the source of light. The whole world was suffused with a sleepy glow. The space I'd been drawn into twice before was completely gray tone, perhaps because it was nighttime, but I remember the dark, gloomy scenery quite vividly. But the colors here were different. The world was lit in the soft, warm tones of Oxford white and cream, seemingly brighter than the closed space of my memory. So while Haruhi's closed space is cold and gray, Sasaki's is warm and inviting, as if a spell had been cast over the world. There are no Celestials, there is no danger. There is nothing but the quiet orange glow of a sleepy sky. So while I keep calling them the evil or anti-SOS Brigade, that's only really true from the SOS Brigade's perspective. Like sure, they're like objectively a bunch of dicks, kidnapping people and shit, but what are they actually trying to do? Fujiwara is trying to change the future to suit his organization's goals, but okay, again, I'm gonna try and be as vague as possible here while still sounding interesting, so just bear with me for a sec. But see, the thing is, space-time has been completely screwed up and distorted because of the actions of Haruhi Suzumiya. And while Mikuru's faction's goal is to protect the current space-time, meaning to let causality unfold naturally, Fujiwara's goal is to transfer Haruhi's powers to someone who can use them for good and fix the universe rather than leave it broken and fractured and not merely obey the established order of events just because that's what already happened. Likewise, while Tachibana Kyoko's faction sees Haruhi as a false god, what if she really is? Her closed space, the inside of her psyche, is cold, dark, and unpredictable, whereas Sasaki's is filled with a soft, warm, comforting glow. When they say the world would be a better place if Sasaki were god, they might be right. Just comparing the two manifested psyches of Haruhi and Sasaki, the difference is night and day, almost literally. I mean, Sasaki says that she gets really angry once every 2 years or so it's possible Haruhi really is the more stable one, but logically, it's very hard to argue against their philosophy. And so rather than the deranged belief of an evil or anti-SOS brigade, each of these really are simply just very legitimate alternative theories of Haruhi Suzumiya. Except for one thing. See, the real reason they're the evil faction is because while they have a parallel to each of the three factions, they are not, in fact, equal. Sure, in place of the Data Overmind, they have the Heavenly Canopy Dominion. Instead of Haruhi, Tachibana Kyoko's faction has elected Sasaki as their god, and instead of a time traveler, well, Fujiwara is also from the future, just he's a total dick about it, but what they don't have is an alternative Kyon, which is why they need Kyon himself to help them transfer Haruhi's powers to Sasaki. Mysteriously, They never actually say specifically what they need his help for, but the truth, I think, is plainly evident. For one, as mentioned by every faction, Kyon is the key to Haruhi's powers. Again, it's not mentioned why or how, but we'll come back to this one in a sec. But also, Kyon seems to be the key to Sasaki's powers as well. Because while she says she's not interested in being God, there is one person who could possibly change her mind. You will end up resolving this matter. That's a little prophecy I can make in this moment. Sasaki laughed, and it sounded like the cry of a dove in the morning. I've put the whole of my trust in you, Kyon. You are my dearest, dearest friend. And so, that is because, however they see him, everyone in the story, even probably Haruhi, understands that Kyon is the true key to Haruhi's powers. Physically, he may be human, but the reason everything revolves around him is that he is just as important as Haruhi. Which leads us to one more theory that I'd like to present, one that isn't explained in the story by any one faction, but rather one that I believe is implied through the personal beliefs of each of the characters. And you'll have to bear with me for a second because it's that Kyon is not actually an ordinary human being. Now you might be like, now hold on, King of Weeaboos, he's explicitly stated to be one multiple times, you just said that yourself, but hey, okay, just hear me out first. Because, see, first, unlike other theories that I or other weebs might present, I'm not saying this is absolute fact or even that I necessarily believe it myself. I'm just saying to consider this as simply one more theory to the truth of Haruhi Suzumiya that I believe is present in the story by reading between the lines. And yes, I'm aware there's a number of fan theories out there regarding this, but as they're all the ramblings of illiterate 14-year-olds back in 2007, apparently physically unable to think deeper than our first point here, consider this the first one that's, coherent. Right, so our first piece of evidence, accordingly, is not so much evidence, but merely an idea that I'd like you to consider. Just how important is Kyon to Haruhi and the world? Obviously important, as Haruhi's chosen one, something again, literally every other major character tells us, but if we think back to everything that happens, it's not that simple, because the one that makes every single major decision in the story is not Haruhi, is not Koizumi or Nagato or Mikuru, but Kyon. At the end of Melancholy, when Haruhi sees Kyon and Mikuru together and is thrown into a jealous rampage that threatens to destroy the world, and Kyon wakes up in that apocalyptic closed space, Mikuru and Nagato each give him hints about what's going on, and Koizumi manages to break through to help him find the way out, but none of them have any real power over Haruhi's inner world. Instead, it's Kyon that realizes that the path to Haruhi's heart is through his own and has to confront his own feelings for this girl that's become such a big part of his life, whereupon he kisses her and they each wake up in the old world. So while it's Haruhi's power that changes the world and everyone else that understands it, the only one that holds the power to choose is Kyon.
教室の後ろにいるクラスメイトを指して、そいつはお前にとって何なのかと問われて、何と答えりゃいいんだ。いやすまん。これもごまかしだな。俺にとってハルヒはただのクラスメイトじゃない。もちろん進化の可能性でも時間の歪みでもましてや神様でもない。あるはずがない。
Similarly, in Disappearance, Nagato, tired of Haruhi's shenanigans and the burden placed upon her, succumbs to emotion and wishes, if only briefly, to live in an ordinary world. Her wish comes true, and Kyon wakes up in a world seemingly without Haruhi, where the only one that remembers the old world and the SOS Brigade is him. But Nagato was unable to fully commit to changing the world. Instead, she left keys to the old world behind where Kyon would find them and the choice between the old world and the new. Because even though she had the power to change the world, even though she may have wanted it herself, she could not choose between worlds because that right belongs only to Kyon.
なんでまた俺だけを元のままにしておいたのか。答えは単純。こいつは俺に選択権を委ねたんだ。
And again, in Snowy Mountain Syndrome, again our cold opener pun intended to Season 3 please, the SOS Brigade is faced with the purgatory of an eternal mystery mansion and they have to decide how to escape and what the consequences of their actions are. And while Koizumi and Nagato are the ones with answers, the choice of what to do is once again left in Kyon's hands. I could go on, but in essentially every single major decision in the story, Kyon is the one with the power to choose. To quote Sasaki in Surprise, "You're the only one who can decide. It's not possible for anyone in this world, nor anyone from the future, nor any extraterrestrial life form. That's why they're so fixated on you. I trust you. That's what I wanted to say. The path you're on is the correct one. And that, Kyon, is something you've long since realized, isn't it? Again and again, we're shown that the one with the power to choose is Kyon. So our next piece of evidence is, again, not so much evidence as it is a thought experiment, this time put forth by Koizumi as he speculates on the real source of Haruhi's powers, wondering aloud to Kyon whether or not it's possible they might actually come from someone or something else. To quote from Intrigues, "I myself no longer fully understand this world, and the agency itself is far from united. One extreme viewpoint is that there are no aliens or time travelers, that Nagato and Asahina are just pitiful, deluded girls." That obviously wasn't true, I said. I'd sign a testament if they wanted me to. But what if Nagato's magic and Asahina's time travel are all the actions of Suzumiya, and the girls are mistaken in believing that they are the source of such things? If that was the reasoning, you could explain anything that way, I said. Or it might be that it's not Suzumiya who possesses this godlike power, but someone else. Koizumi was probably trying to add some sarcasm to his smile, but all I saw was his usual handsome face. The eye of the hurricane is calm, but all around it rages a terrible storm. There may be someone who looks on the center from the outside. Are you not the one who's kept busy by all these events? If you were the screenwriter, would you cast yourself in such a tiring role? We'll come back to that last paragraph in a sec, but in other words, just because the center of this power is Haruhi, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's the one holding it. Like maybe her powers actually belong to Taniguchi or that ribbon in her hair or some random rock on the ground somewhere. I mean, that's obviously stupid, but the point is that the mere existence of power itself doesn't make someone God, especially if we don't know why she has it in the first place. So the philosophical question we need to consider is, what does it mean to have this power? And what does it mean when Koizumi calls her a god? Like, literally, how do you define God? In Haruhi's case, someone with the power to reshape the universe, but the word God also implies intent, implies control. But if the only thing it refers to is power, then is that label still meaningful? So then, tying this back to our first point, if she's not conscious of her powers and cannot control them, but someone else can you really still call her a god? I mean, how do we really know she's actually the source and not merely the outcome of her powers? Like, sure, Kyon doesn't have any powers himself, but if the person who does only has them by coincidence, and Kyon is the one controlling them, who do these powers really belong to? So now I think we need to break down this question of God. What does it mean to be God? And more importantly, what does it mean to be God? So our third and last piece of evidence is, and if you're guessing this is another thought experiment put out by one of the characters, sorry, but nope, wrong, idiot. It's actually two characters, plus Koizumi, so 3, and also Kyon kind of, so 3.5. But anyway, I think this is our most important piece of evidence because it comes from both Haruhi and Sasaki, our two supposed deities. And yes, it is just a thought experiment, which is why this is only a theory, but the fact that these ideas don't come from me and instead come directly from the characters in the books, I think tells us quite a bit about what's really going on. So, in surprise, as the anti-SOS Brigade pushes to have Kyon dismiss Haruhi as a false deity and elect Sasaki as the god of the new world, Sasaki tells them that despite the actions of Tachibana and the rest, she personally has zero interest in becoming god. Kyon, I don't particularly want to change the world. If I do it wrong, I could easily wind up changing myself in the process of changing the world. And I myself wouldn't even realize I'd been changed. Don't you see? I'm of this world. I'm one of the components that makes it up. If I change the world, then whether I like it or not, I'm changing myself. In such a case, even though I was the one whose will changed the world, I would never realize that the world I lived in was the result of changes I'd personally made. I'd lose those memories because I'd change along with the world. Which brings me to a dilemma. I would have amazing powers, but I would never be conscious of the effects of those powers. Importantly, Koizumi also says the exact same thing in Sai. I doubt we have any way of knowing whether Suzumiya is a god or a similar existence of some sort, but there is one thing we can be certain of. If she were to freely use her power, it would not matter if the world changed or not because no one would realize it. That's quite impressive. After all, Suzumiya herself would not realize it. Why? Because Suzumiya is a part of the world. Sasaki then goes on to say, people have two reactions when they encounter something they don't understand. They deny it, or they try to understand it. Neither is particularly correct. Everyone has their own individual system of values, and they have no obligation to twist them around in the name of understanding. And yet, it's impossible for that system to remain unchanged their whole life. People need to ask themselves why it is they can't understand something and come up with a satisfying answer to that question. If you could simply control the whole world, you'd never encounter anything odd or have to interpret anything. In other words, she's saying the power to change the world is completely meaningless, and having ultimate power over the existing one would be boring because you would never be surprised, you'd never be challenged, and you'd never need to work hard to understand anything. Now, while each character can only share their perspective and their own personal beliefs, like how the first part of her speech is almost identical to something Koizumi says, the second part also sounds almost exactly like something Haruhi says. Tests are so stupid. I mean, no matter how great my answer is, the best score I can get is 100. I hate anything that has restrictions like that on it. If I'm gonna be stuck within bounds I can't escape, forget about it. I mean, just think about it, Kyon. If the test taker's ability exceeds the test maker, and they think of an answer that requires a greater mental leap than the question required, but then makes a careless mistake on another question, they won't get a perfect score. Don't you think that's weird? If it were me, I'd give 200 points, or even 1,000 for a truly great or elegant answer. That's what I don't like. So despite being opposites in so many ways, what she and Sasaki say here are extremely similar. To her, a perfect score is absolutely meaningless. She wants to exceed and defy expectations, to be extraordinary. But if you're omnipotent, if you can see and know and anticipate and understand everything, then there are no expectations to break. And so the paradox of being God is that despite, by definition, being the most extraordinary being in existence, nothing can ever be extraordinary to you because God physically cannot exceed their own expectations. I mean, even Kyon says something similar. But, if you'll notice, Sasaki presents a problem with her own argument. Like she says, if she changed the world, she'd have no memory of the previous one and who she really is. But that doesn't necessarily mean it would be meaningless. If you could change the world, but as a consequence you lose all memories of being God, then wouldn't it stand to reason that you could still defy expectations? If you didn't have memories of being God, and no one knew that you were God, then that solves the very problem she establishes in the first place. Because if you were also just an ordinary person, if you saw yourself and were seen as no different than the people around you, then you'd still be held to the expectations of the society you live in. All of which naturally leads us to the question, what if this has happened before? What if the world has already been remade by a god who realized this very conundrum? I mean, think about it. Haruhi almost changed the world once already, and all it took was a little bit of jealousy. Hell, even Nagato once remade the world and took away Haruhi's powers with it. What possible reason do we have to believe that this is the original world? Because if being God means you'd never be able to encounter the unexpected, maybe Haruhi already willed herself to be unaware of her own powers because being God was simply too boring. But there's more. Following this logic, and the idea that her power can be transferred to another person, then the next logical step is that it's possible not only that this is not in fact the original world, but also that her powers were not originally hers. That someone else had this very idea and decided that the world that would make them happiest is one where Haruhi was God. So if this was the case, if Haruhi was not, in fact, the original God, then the question we're left with is, who was? Maybe, just maybe, that is why Kyon is so important. Maybe that is the reason that Haruhi and Sasaki both chose Kyon, the reason that despite being an ordinary human being, Kyon's fate is so intertwined with hers. I mean, if we've learned anything, it's that when it comes to Haruhi Suzumiya, there is absolutely no such thing as a coincidence. So then why Kyon? Why was she sitting directly behind an ordinary human in class, and why did he manage to talk to and befriend her when no one else could? Is that really the only coincidence in the story? No, I think there's definitely something special about him, and I think it was there before she even spoke to him for the first time. I mean, what did we say about who Haruhi is? That for all her quirkiness, for all she pretends to want the supernatural, that deep down, what she really wants is the ordinary. What she really wants is Kyon. So maybe, just maybe, the reason for this gigantic disparity in how she acts and what she wants is that her search for the supernatural is not something she herself desires, but rather her responsibility as the de facto god of this world.
僕はこう考えます。鈴宮さんは誰かから神のごとき力を与えられた特殊な人間であると。現実として鈴宮さんもこの世界の一部であることがその傍証になると思います。もしかしたら我々のこの現実は失敗作なのかもしれない。その失敗した世界を修正する使命を持った者が鈴宮春日という存在なのかもしれない。
I mean, what does Kyon say at the start of the story?
宇宙人、未来人、超能力者、そんなのいるわけね。でもちょっとはいてほしいみたいな最大公約数的なことを考えるくらいにまで俺も成長したのさ。
Haruhi pretends to want the supernatural, but really desires the ordinary, whereas Kyon pretends to want peace and quiet, but what he really wants is the extraordinary. Finding the supernatural is what Haruhi does, but what she actually wants is to be seen. And the person that does that most is Kyon, the only person with the ability to control her powers, and the one person who truly sees just how special she is. I mean, what was it that Koizumi was saying in that speech about Haruhi's powers? The eye of the hurricane is calm, but all around it rages a terrible storm. There may be someone who looks in on the center from the outside. Are you not the one who's kept busy by all these events? Would you cast yourself in such a tiring role? I mean, it's ironic, but if we think back to what Kyon said at the end of Disappearance, I think the answer is a very clear and resounding yes, he would.
当たり前だ。楽しかった。決まってるじゃねえか。面白くないなどと答える奴がいたら、そいつはほんまもんのアホだ。宇宙人に未来人に超能力者だぞ。しかも、さらに超強力な春日までがそこにいるんだぞ。
So, here's my ultimate theory of Haruhi Suzumiya. Haruhi is an ordinary girl who is impetuous and selfish, but with a glow that radiates like the morning sun. She spends her life on a never-ending quest for the supernatural, and will drag in anyone who dares be caught in her wake. And that quest started 3 years ago when she woke up to the reality of the world, when her life and own existence seemed cold and distant and meaningless. This made her angry and spiteful, but as she grew and met Kyon, the one bound to her by fate, her personality opened up more and more as he gave her the one thing her heart truly desires. And that's because that explosion 3 years ago, that was when the universe was created. Because the original god of this world was not Haruhi, but Kyon. Kyon was a miserable deity who had long grown bored of omnipotence and realized the only way he could be truly happy was if someone else were God. But, he realized, he couldn't just give his powers to someone else, for that would doom them to the very same fate. It had to be someone who could never know what they truly were. And the best way to guarantee his own life would be filled with adventure was to remake the world and tie his own fate to this person. And the one he chose was the mortal he most admired, Haruhi Suzumiya. And so, in this new world, they were polar opposites, north and south, yin and yang, perfectly matched to fulfill each of their own desires, and together, despite the unfettered hurricane that is their relationship, lead a life of pure happiness. Now again, this is just another theory that I've put together following thought experiments laid out by several of the characters, and I do have one bonus theory that I'll share at the very end, so please keep watching. But so anyway, I don't want to say this theory is absolute or that my evidence, and again I'm being very generous with the definition of this word, cannot be interpreted in other ways, or even that there aren't some other holes in it that I haven't thought of. But if there is one thing I've learned about Japanese fiction from all of the essays that I've written for my channel, it's that they like to tell you what their stories are about, lay bare the philosophy of their own work. And so I don't think that they're just random musings by the characters, but rather have deliberate meaning integral to the themes at the heart of the story. Because while the supernatural is what drives the story, it isn't what makes it meaningful. It's Haruhi and Kyon that do. Ultimately, like Haruhi herself, this is a story about being seen, about the existential pain about existing in the universe, about discovering the reality that we are just one of billions of people living on some pale blue dot lost in some random corner of a vast, empty universe. And all of this, about aliens and time travelers and espers and gods, about this philosophy of what it's like to be God, is just one long, lonely struggle to understand what exactly it means to be seen. This is a total guess on my part, preface Sasaki, but the problem we're facing may just be showing our reason for existence. It's possible that everyone is working so hard just because they're trying to make their raison d'etre into reality. This isn't a matter of being an alien, a time traveler, esper. Each of them must exist and try to get another being to acknowledge their existence, and they're all taking action with that single goal in mind. I mean, Kyon, have you acknowledged that Kuyo, Tachibana, and Fujiwara all exist in the here and now? I mean, just to the extent that you wouldn't forget them if they all just disappeared. They were here, in this place, in this time. Perhaps their wish is but a single plaintive sentiment. Don't forget us. So now, obviously, this isn't the final word because, well, I mean, the final word has yet to be written. Tanigawa hasn't finished writing this story, and until he has, that's all we have to go with. And that will be, a while, probably. To his credit, he has been releasing more short stories, albeit ones that are also, narratively speaking, increasingly up their own assholes. But as it's been 15 years since the release of The Surprise of Haruhi Suzumiya, and with no new installments on the horizon, I might not hold my breath. But I'm okay with that for now, because, well, for one, comparing my conclusion here to the essay I released 4 years ago after watching only the anime, I think I have a pretty solid grasp on what this story is and what it's trying to say. But also, really, the story is almost over, and we know exactly where it's going, and we even get a short glimpse into Kyon and Haruhi's future at the end of Surprise. Almost being the operative word here, probably like 2 or more books, but you know. So we'll get to that one bonus theory in a sec, but before we do, one, a couple years ago, I fell absolutely in love with this other anime about a little card game called Karuta, which fascinated me so much I went and met a bunch of players who invited me to their event and let me interview them and even taught me how to play. Look, I mostly sit inside and watch anime and play video games. You have no idea how hard this was for me to do. But not just the anime, but the game itself and my video about it is an exploration of what it means to be truly passionate about something, and it's honestly one of my best pieces of work, and I put months of effort into it, and as of writing this, it has like 3,000 views, so dear God, please go and watch it. Anyway, before we go, I did promise you one bonus theory. And that is that the plot of the movie is actually a metaphor for the events of the story. I mean, think about it. The plot is clearly meant to parallel reality, what with it being supernatural beings fighting over the secrets of the universe and each of the characters being somehow their real selves. Mikuru a time traveler, Yuki a space alien wizard, and Koizumi an esper with super special superpowers, and importantly, Kyon being the narrator that makes sense of it all. There's even a scene in the movie where Koizumi and Nagoro stop to talk directly to Kyon about him being the key to all of it, so clearly it does have meaning. But wait a second, so-called king of weeaboos, you're probably saying, sure the characters line up somehow, but the plot of the movie is just nonsense. But I mean, is it? Are you sure? Again, I'm gonna be vague to avoid spoilers, but don't you think a good versus evil love triangle fighting over someone yet to awaken to their dormant ultimate power sounds eerily close to what we discussed about Surprise with Sasaki and the evil SOS Brigade? If, says Koizumi, you take the wrong side, then...
鍵はあくまで扉を開ける手段でしかないものです。その扉を開けたとき、何かが変わるのでしょう。おそらく変わるのは。
Now, this is where the meaning of the movie starts to get ambiguous as Koizumi realizes his powers and blasts the evil witch Yuki off into space where she's presumably never seen again until the inevitable lazy rehash of a sequel. So if you want my actual take, it's that whether or not Tanigawa planned this foreshadowing like 7 volumes in advance, the movie is actually mostly just shitty and dumb, and if you try to read anything into it, you'll end up just going in circles, but it is fun to think about. Anyway, it's time for me to go, friends, so I'll let Past Weeb see you off from his visit to Nishinomiya. While I'm here, I'd just like to take a sec to ask you if you thought this video was insightful to please step on that like button and consider sharing it with one of your cooler friends. Anyway, that's it for me for today. Thank you so much for your time, friends, and I hope to see you again soon.